Hi everyone, my name's Angus, and I'm an accredited certifier in New South Wales. In this series of videos, I'll be walking you through the entire process for completing a development in this state, from concept stage to completion, and clearing up some of the confusion that can seep in along the way. I've been in this job for a few years now, and there are a few things that you should understand up front when you want to build something in this state. Whether it's a house, a shed, or a pool, the first is cost. What a lot of people don't realise is there are actually quite large sunk costs in building before you even think about getting excavators in. Depending on if you're building in a new subdivision or not, you might have to pay for things like geotech reports, site surveys, flora and fauna reports, heritage reports, and bushfire assessments. The reason I mention new subdivisions is because these reports have typically already been done for the whole area, so you might be able to piggyback off those. The second is when you see properties advertised by real estate agents as dual occupancy potential or room to add a granny flat. You'll almost always notice the letters STCA, like right after it. That stands for subject to council approval, which essentially means that the real estate agents could be just lying through their teeth and they can get away with it because they're not actually promising you that it will work. Basically, if a real estate agent tells you about possible development options on a site, take it with a huge grain of salt because they probably just want the sale. The last thing is that you should check if you need an approval before building anything. In New South Wales, there's no way to get an approval for work that's already been started. The only thing you can do is get an agreement from council that they won't make you knock it down. I'm going to cover that more in a later video though. For the rest of this video, I'll be going over the things that don't require approval in New South Wales. The full list and details are available in the New South Wales State Environmental Planning Policy Exempt and Compliant Development Codes. I've linked it below for you to refer to when you need. This is the list here, and as you can see there are quite a few. Most of these won't affect you in a standard suburban house, however there are some that I'll get to now that I get asked about a lot more frequently. I'm not going to go into full detail on each one, so feel free to pause the video or go back to the link and read it for yourself. Okay, so let's start with aircon units. Basically with these, you can't build them forward of your front wall or facing the main road. They have to be at least 450mm off each fence, and they're supposed to be a metre from bedrooms in adjoining houses. I've never seen that one really checked before, but it is something that's in the requirements. For awnings, blinds, and canopies, they can't have an area more than 10 square metres, can't be more than 2 metres off the wall, can't be closer than 450mm from a side or rear boundary, and if you connect it to the fascia of the building, it has to be engineered. You'll find with most of the things in this that they say that it can't be closer than either 900mm or 450mm. That's really standard for most development. So balconies, decks, patios, pergolas, terraces, and verandas. These are going to get asked about a lot, and you can't have more than one being 25 meters squared, and the total of all of these types of things can't be more than the numbers right there. And you also have to be careful when you're building these so that there aren't any walls around that are higher than 1.4 meters, because if there are, then it's classified as a room and not as a balcony or a deck. The only other real things to keep in mind with this is that they can't be more than a meter above ground level, which is pretty important. That gets checked. And it also can't be more than 3 meters, or if it's attached to the side of your house, can't be higher than the gutter line of the house. So for cabanas, cubby houses, ferneries, garden sheds, gazebos, and greenhouses, can't have an area of more than 20 square meters, can't be more than 3 meters high, have to be at least 900mm from the boundaries, and really importantly, they can't be shipping containers. There's a lot of people who try and use the small shipping containers as garden sheds, and you're just not allowed to do that. For carports, they can't have a floor area more than 25 square meters if the lot area is more than 300 square meters. If it's less than 300 square meters, you're only allowed 20 square meters. You've got the same rule about the height, and that if it's attached to the house, it has to be lower than the gutter line. It has to be a meter behind the building line. And the building line is defined for this reason, this context, as being the line where the front of your house is. So like the front wall of the first room of your house, that's where the building line is. Demolition. I get asked about this one quite a bit. So for demolition and exempt development, basically it allows you to demolish anything that you would be able to have approved by exempt development. So for any of the things that we're talking about here, you're allowed to take them down without approval as well. All right, another big one is driveways and hardstand spaces. So this one is a little bit more in depth because there are quite a few rules around it. So it has to be designed in a way so that the stormwater runoff goes into the normal stormwater system and doesn't just flow into your neighbour's yard. It has to be built in accordance with that Australian standard. And then this next bit may not make a lot of sense if you don't do this stuff very frequently, but if it's ancillary to a dwelling, which means like it's attached to a house, it can't have cut-off fill more than 600mm, and if it's not attached to a house, it can't have cut-off fill more than a meter. And for driveways, you can't have them any wider than the hardstand space, carport, or garage that it's connected to. And if you are putting in a new crossover over the verge and onto the road, you have to get approval from council before you do that. For hardstand spaces, they have to be a minimum of 2.6 wide and 5.4 meters long, and not more than 20 square meters. And then if it's attached to a house, it has to be at least 1 meter behind the building line, and at least 900mm from each side or rear boundary. And now this area part is really important. For all of your driveways, hardstand spaces, pathways, and paved areas, so all like concreted or paved areas, can't be more than 15% of the lot area, or 150 square meters, whichever's less. So you'll have to calculate that out for your own yard and your own lot, and then work out which one of those is less, and that's the maximum you're allowed. And then there's some landscaping requirements still. So in your front yard, if the lot is less than 18 meters wide, you have to have at least a quarter of that area in front of your building line landscaped. And if it's more than 18 meters, you have to have at least half. Now, for earthworks, retaining walls, and structural supports, you can't have cut-off fill more than 600mm. It has to be at least a meter from each boundary, and it has to be at least 40 meters from a natural watercourse. So if you've got a river nearby, or you're on a larger block that has a canal or something running through it, then potentially you won't be able to do it as exempt development, and you'd have to get an approval. You can't have any of your earthworks or retaining walls redirect surface water flow. So if you had like overland flow paths that had already been put in when your house was built, you can't alter that by putting something like this in. If you are going to fill more than 150mm deep, it can't be more than 20% of the lot area. So you can't just completely re-level your whole block. It can only be 20%. For retaining walls, they can't be more than 600mm. They have to be separated from other retaining walls and structural supports by at least 2 meters. has to be at least a metre from easements, sewers, and water mains, which you can check by going onto the Sydney Water Building Plan Approval website and doing a search. It'll cost you a few dollars, but you should do one anyway when you're going to build something. I'll go over that in a bit more detail in a later video though. You have to connect it to proper stormwater drainage. So if you put an ag line behind it to drain it properly, then that has to be connected into your stormwater system. Now, emergency works and repairs. This one is really, really misunderstood. A lot of people think that if something just starts falling down on their block, they're allowed to rebuild it or take it down and do something else or anything like that. It's actually not quite true. So you can actually only do emergency works where the government has actually made a declaration that there's been a state of emergency in that area. So if there was flooding or bushfires, or if you're in Queensland, a cyclone or things like that, that's when you would be able to do it. But normally, you can't actually use this provision. However, if you are going to use it, it has to be done within 2 years of the declaration. You can't change the configuration or size or whatever you're rebuilding. Fences are a bit of a tricky one because they're governed by both this set of rules and also the Dividing Fences Act. The Dividing Fences Act has more information about who pays for fences and how you organise that with your neighbours and all that kind of business. This has more of the rules about what the fence actually has to look like. So for your side boundary fences, they can't be more than 1.8 high. And if they're masonry, they can't be more than 1.2 high. Can't have any gates that open outwards. They have to either be internal gates or they have to be sliding gates. If they're metal, they can't be shiny. You've got to have low reflectivity. And if you're going to be putting a fence on your front boundary, it can't be more than 1.2 meters high, and it has to be open for at least 20% of the area that's more than 400 mil off the ground. And above that 400 mil, you can't have any solid piece that's more than 350 mil. It's a little confusing, but if you think about it, a lot of those fences that you see around the place that have bricks up to kind of your shin, then they have little brick pylons with the aluminium or metal strips in between. That's what this is for. And on a secondary road, so if you've got a corner block, your secondary road, which isn't the one that the front of your house faces, only 50% of that has to comply with the maximum 1.2. Otherwise, the rest of it is allowed to be the 1.8 high normal fence. For minor building alterations on the inside of your house, it includes basically this whole list here. So you're allowed to do pretty basic things like repainting, like changing the flooring, all those sort of things, like redoing your kitchen, your bathroom, changing out like your vanities and wardrobes, all those sort of things. But really critically, you're not allowed to change the configuration of a room. So you're not allowed to put a wall up, take a wall out, do anything like that. And you're also not allowed to rearrange where the things are in your bathroom. So if you're allowed to pull out your toilet, put a new toilet in, but it has to be in the same place. If you change the layout of it, then this doesn't apply. And they also go into a bit of detail about if you're replacing or renovating deteriorated door frames. So it has to be made of equivalent or improved materials. So basically, if it's decayed, you can't just do a really shoddy job. It has to actually be decent. You are also not allowed to reduce window sizes, not allowed to change the size of doorways, You can't enclose an open area, so if you have a balcony or a patio or something like that, you're not allowed to put walls up that would then make that into a room. And you're also not allowed to affect the load bearing capacity of a building. So you're not allowed to take out, obviously, like structural beams or things like that, or put in something that would be like really, really heavy in a small area that could potentially be a problem for the building. For external building alterations, you're allowed to do all of these things. Give you a second to read that. Most of these are pretty similar to the interior ones, just painting and things like that, bit of installation and repair. So basically, the only real other things to keep in mind with this is that you're not allowed to change the size or do anything to any of the openings in a wall or a roof, so any doors, windows, things like that, they all have to stay the same. And if you're recladding your house or want to attach fittings and decorative things, you can't do it on buildings that are more than 2 stories, and it can't use combustible cladding. The only other thing really to keep in mind is that you can't change any emergency exit paths from a building. So if there is specific fire requirements for your house and your block, you can't change anything that would affect it. All of these have stipulations about if you're doing the work in an area that's bushfire prone. You'll really have to read each one yourself for the specifics, but some of them they're just not allowed full stop, and others there are just requirements for not reducing the level of bushfire protection. For skylights, roof windows, and ventilators, which are whirligigs, the little things that spin around, you can't have more than 2% of your roof area be taken up by these. They have to be at least 900 mil from each boundary. And if you've got a dual lock, so a house on either side of the wall with the separating wall down the middle, it has to be at least 900 mil away from where that separation is. They have to be properly waterproofed, and they can't reduce the structural integrity, which is pretty normal. As you can see, the requirements around these are quite strict and restrictive, which is where further approvals come in. I'll be covering your options for approvals in the next video, so make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching.